Hello everyone, welcome to The Green Man. Hope you're all doing good and well. So in this video, I'm going to be ranking the Squid Game episodes from my least favourite to my favourite. Squid Game is, of course, the currently very popular Korean dystopian drama series that has been on Netflix. And I just want to say up front, in this video, I'm going to give away some pretty major spoilers, so do turn off or close down your screen if you do not want to see the spoilers or hear any spoilers from this series. So, I've really thoroughly enjoyed this. There are a few points I want to make as to why I enjoyed it before I crack on with the rankings. If you want to get straight to the rankings, I will put timestamps in the description box below so you can navigate to those quicker. But otherwise, I will crack on with the introduction. So what I really liked about this was the... first of all, the way they got you invested in the characters, and particularly in the early episodes of the series, they did well at crafting the backstories of each of the key characters in the show, which turned out to be pretty important when the series grows and it develops, and the characters are faced with those difficult decisions later in the show, and you can sort of see more about the reasons behind why certain characters made certain decisions. Whether or not you agree with those decisions, of course, is where the show also draws on some of its strengths. I think the moral and ethical dilemmas that you get presented with in Squid Games shows the desperation of a lot of these characters and their circumstances in a lot of ways, perhaps makes the decision understandable or their decision making understandable, even if, as I say, we don't necessarily agree with their actions or their choices. And that again is another real strength of this show. It's a smart, intelligent show in the way it maneuvers you as the viewer into the different games, not just by throwing you straight into these violent games as other movies might, but by making you see a bit more about what makes the choices of these characters suddenly much more important. You become much more invested in those characters and the games themselves. So that's what I really liked about Squid Game. I think now I'm going to crack on with my rankings again, just to warn people about spoilers, so you get the opportunity to switch off if you don't want to hear any spoilers. So my least favourite episode at number 9 is the Frontman episode, which was the penultimate episode of the series. I thought this was I think possibly the shortest episode. The series only about half an hour long, so that was actually one of the reasons I think this would be my least favourite. I felt like that, the way they ended the story of Kang Se-byuk, I think I've got her name right there, was it felt like this episode was almost solely for her to be sort of taken out of the story, so that you got the ultimate showdown between Sung-woo and Gi-hun in the final episode, and it was kind of, I don't know, it just felt like that was pretty much the sole purpose of this episode, and I thought, given the character build up for her throughout, felt like a little disappointing the way she went. I don't know if anyone else feels the same, but for me, that's why Frontman comes at the lowest point, or at the bottom of my list. Number 8 is the episode A Fair World, which was, this had some pretty exciting stuff going on, some interesting developments and more character building, the character twists, thinking particularly with the old man character and his relationship with Gi-hun in this episode, and how that would later be telling in later installments. A Fair World for me, it just was one of the more forgettable episodes. I don't know why I think that necessarily, but I won't remember this episode when it comes down, in a year's time. If I were to think, Squid Game, what would be the episodes I remember? It wouldn't be A Fair World, to be honest. And so for me, I'll put it down quite low in the pecking order on my list. Number 7, I've chosen VIPs. VIPs, don't get me wrong, a hugely excellent episode for its suspense. The sequences with the glass panels was fantastic. I have very little really to actually criticise, and a sign of how good the series is now, even at even at 7 of 9 in the rankings, I'm already going to start to struggle with the ranking of these episodes, because VIPs was a great episode. Actually, for me, the weak point of this episode was the VIPs. I mean, I found them kind of annoying, a little bit sleazy, and Not sure how necessary they really were, except for Jun Ho's storyline, if you like. But for me, this was, because of them, it wasn't as good an episode as I thought it maybe could have been. But the glass panel affair in game alone was great, and I loved the sort of final confrontation that we had between Han Mi Neo, I think, apologies pronunciations, and that really nasty guy, the kind of bully character, and their showdown is great in this episode. So I thought it's still a really good episode. It just, figures it's quite low down, number 7. Number 6 is the episode Hell, which was actually the sort of character development episode, and a really, really good one. I mean, just for the fact that perhaps it wasn't one of the more exciting episodes is the only reason I can put this as low down as 6, because otherwise a really, really good episode at building up each character, explaining their backstories, why they have the motivations they do to do the Squid Game, and suddenly the series makes that bit more sense, and it strengthens the dilemmas of the later episodes that the characters are then faced with. So Hell, very, very strong episode, but purely for the reason this one's more likely to be an episode that you wouldn't necessarily rewatch much. It's just one of those character building episodes, but it's still a strong episode, and I still think very, very good. Number 5 is One Lucky Day, which is the final instalment of the series. Perhaps you'd expect of a really good TV series the final instalment to be much nearer the top. And I still think, as I say, now all these episodes are fantastic episodes, but One Lucky Day for me, it did drag a touch at times, even though we got the reveals, a couple of big reveals in this episode. You got the great showdown between Gi-hun and Song Woo. In spite of that, I felt kind of halfway through myself, kind of, thinking, I'm not really sure now whether this is all kind of necessary, some of this really slow stuff going on, even though I did feel that the old man bit was obviously a necessary part of this. I did feel at times it just dragging on a touch for me, but I mean, that's the only thing I can say. I thought it was all necessary stuff for the series, so I can hardly be too critical, ultimately. Number 4 is Stick to the Team. What an amazing episode this was, with the tug of war on the bridge and the gap in the middle of the bridge, and the little twists in the kind of tactics of the team with the characters we've been following, so naturally you're probably rooting for them. But it's really intense, really, really good episode. There were just 3 episodes that I enjoyed that little bit more than this one. Otherwise, this is a top Squid Game installment. Number 3 is the opening episode, which was, of course, Red Light, Green Light, perhaps the most talked about episode of this series in many forums. And I think this episode just got just about everything right, with the early introduction to the series nicely setting the scene before you got into the impacting horror scene at the end with that, with the children's game of Red Light, Green Light being turned into a massacre. And I just really thought this was an incredibly well shot and well directed episode, with so many interesting, slightly bizarre, when you first watch it you think, God, this is so weird, but it's so good at the same time. And perhaps the episode for many that will stick out the most after they've finished the series. It's one of the best opening episodes to this kind of a series I've ever seen, for sure. Number 2, it's a really intense, really nerve-wracking, The Man with the Umbrella. This was the 3rd episode in, as I recall, and this was a great exercise in edge of your seat tension and how to build that to the max. And the way we see Gi-hun, you can't help but cheer for him with this really difficult, what do you call it, cookie shape cutting that he has to do. And it's just, when he finally gets the umbrella out, it's hard not to kind of cheer and just just be thrilled that he's managed to do that. Whether or not you're a big fan of his character, and he does have lots of flaws, I think, but when you're kind of rooting for him to do that and to finish it, it's a great moment in the series. And I kind of loved everything else in this episode as well, not just that, the way they had to make, the way you see how their choice, I wasn't really familiar with this game myself, so the way you see how their choices work out is also a really entertaining part of this episode. It's just wonderful. Number one, my favourite episode from Squid Game to finish off. By process of elimination, you know what this is, right? I don't need to even probably announce it, but it's Gigambu. And this is where I think Squid Game was probably at its absolute peak and at its strongest, because this is where you as the viewer were shown just how the moral dilemmas were suddenly there, and the pressures on these characters now that they're facing each other face to face in pairs, and some of them in pairs where you have like the husband and wife, where you're now in this life or death situation. And for many of these characters, it's a no-win situation. If they don't play the game, probably they'll both die. If they do, one of them is going to die, and it becomes a question of morally, who should that be? And if they play the game, it's the rules of the game. But as we see, it's not just the rules at play here, it's the characters themselves, and that again is where Squid Game triumphs in this episode. And you as the viewer, it asks you perhaps yourself, in this kind of life or death situation, how would you behave when the only other option really is death? And quite intriguing to see that at play here. And I think it does show the true nature of some characters in this, and even with the character that is kind of the sort of hero. I mean, I struggle to call him a hero, but he's the main, he's the sort of protagonist of all of this. And you do find yourself, I think he's quite a likable character in spite of the mistakes that he makes. It is interesting. Anyway, that's the end of my Squid Game ranking episode, or video even. I hope you enjoyed it. Do feel free as ever to like and subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed it. I do videos sometimes of this sort. I do quite a lot of coverage on sci-fi, fantasy and horror, but also a lot on music, because I'm really into rock and heavy metal stuff as well. But anyway, I'm going to leave things there. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekends. Bye for now.